Hi, I'm Pastor Jen. I want to talk today about a woman who understood that she was meant to be put in the game. There's a woman in scripture, and her name is Deborah. And maybe we all know the story of Deborah, but just in case you don't, I just kind of want to bring a couple of new lights. Now, in my last video, I was talking about the word that God used when He created women, which is the helper. And we were talking about the word Azer. And in that word that's used in Genesis, it's used in Psalms, it's used in Deuteronomy, it's used a few different times. It's used about 20 different times in scripture. Two of them were about creating women, and three of them are about help that people are not going to receive. And about 16 times it's talking about God Himself when He shows up to help His people that are calling on Him, and He helps turn the tide of the battle, and they start going into victory when they were sinking into defeat previously. So Deborah was a judge, and this is at a point in history when the Israelites had just come into the promised land, and so Moses died before they went in. Joshua helped them conquest all the lands, that the promised land that were promised, and he established all the tribes. And then the Lord he instructed the people to abide by the covenant that they were currently in with the Lord, with all of the blessings and all of the curses that were in store for them if they either obeyed or disobeyed how the Lord told them to act. So in Judges chapter 2, the period of the Judges is a period of about 400 years where Israel tried to keep the covenant, failed, got oppressed, invoked basically the curses of the covenant. They would cry out to the Lord. The Lord would feel sorry for them because he loved them, and He did want for them to succeed, and He would raise up a judge. And we see that God knows exactly what leader is needed for the situation and the people that Israel is at every given time. Moses was the leader for the wilderness, but Moses wasn't the leader for conquering the promised land. Joshua was the leader for conquering the promised land. And we see this way back in the beginning of Deuteronomy. I want to say it's maybe chapter 3 or so, where the Lord told Moses to tell Joshua to be strong and courageous. He's going to be the one that leads the Israelites into victory. And so some of us forget that way back then was when Moses knew that he was not going to be entering the promised land. It wasn't at the time that he struck the rock instead of speaking to it. That's a reiteration of something that he already knew for a long time. So the Lord knew that entering the promised land and establishing the tribes in their lands and overcoming all of the peoples that were in the lands was going to require somebody that was strong and courageous. And that's why Joshua, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous. Moses tells him that. The people even tell him, we will follow you as long as you are strong and courageous. I think that's in the end of Joshua chapter 1. So now Joshua dies, and there becomes this period of judges. Whenever the Lord knew that Israel needed a strong man, He raised up Samson. When they needed a mighty man of valor, He raised up Gideon. But there was a time when what Israel needed was Deborah. And Deborah didn't sit back and go, Lord, isn't leadership a boy's job? I don't think that, are you sure that I'm supposed, no, she understood that she was a prophetess, that she was a mother, that she was a judge, that she was capable of carrying and occupying the highest social position in the land, the highest political position in the land, the highest military position in the land, and the highest civic position in the land. She understood that her gifting was what God decided that Israel needed at that moment. And here's what happened with the judges. It says in Judges chapter 2, the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. chapter 2, verse 15. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them. Just as he had sworn them, they were in great distress. They were invoking their covenant curses at that time. Then the Lord would raise up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Yet they would not listen to the judges, but they prostituted themselves to other gods and worshiped them. They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors who had been obedient. And this is verse 18. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of their hands of the enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people would return to their ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. And they refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. So at this time, Deborah was raised up by God, chosen by God, and he was with her. Out of all of the people in Israel, he decided that she was the one that was needed to hold all of these different positions, that she was the one that was needed, her skill set and her gifting. It wasn't because there was no men that were capable. It wasn't because the men at the time were cowards. I mean, we need to stop preaching this junk. We need to understand that the Lord knows exactly what is needed for every situation. And then when we go to chapter 5 and we start hearing, or 4, and we start hearing about how she's in the middle of judging and she's helping Israel clean up their mess and she's dealing with the sins of the nation. And once she's able to clean it up to a certain point, the Lord goes, okay, it's time for us to go deal with these oppressors. So she gets a word of the Lord. She's in the middle of doing her work. She gets a word of the Lord. She calls for Barak. She tells him what the word is. And he says, okay, he's the highest, under her, he's the military leader. And he decides, I want you to be with me, because he valued her opinion. He valued that she had a direct line to God. And she's like, okay, I'll go with you. This is going to happen. And you can read the story. But we need to stop talking about how Barak was cowardly. Barak had respect for the person who had the highest position in the land. The Barak, as myself, I'm a pastor too, and I want the people who hear the Lord to be with me when we're going into battle. I want to have direct line. He speaks to me, but he also speaks to other people, and I want those people to be near me. And so we really need to understand that Deborah was what was needed. What was needed was a mother. You see it in chapter 5. The roads were desolate. Village life had ceased until I, Deborah, arose a mother. She wasn't rising up as a prophet. She wasn't rising up as a judge. What Israel needed at that moment was a mother, and the Lord knew that, and she understood that too. And she helped change the tide from them being oppressed to them walking back in their covenant promises, because that's one of the things that judges and prophets do, is they are covenant enforcers. And women can be covenant enforcers just as well as men can if they are called. The gender is not what matters. What matters is if you're called to call people back into covenant fidelity. That's what the calling of a prophet is, or at least a part of the calling of a prophet. So I just wanted to share a little bit about that, about Judges and Deborah, and really help open our eyes to be able to see that the Lord has big things for women. He really does. And we need to stop telling them that they can only rise so far.